Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor for me to be here and talk to you about business ethics, about corporate responsibility in the next about 45 minutes, and I'll be glad to answer questions if you or answer your statement, comment your statements on my talk. There's one thing when I tell my colleagues I have a new field, I have a new topic that I want to stress, which is the limitation of the responsibility that a company has. And if I tell them about that, the first reaction is, especially in the academic world, you cannot go out there and tell these managers about the limitations of their responsibilities. Go out and tell them that they are responsible. Their business is responsible, and they, as managers, as business people, are responsible for social, or how I would like to say it, for societal problems. But still, the point is, if we take a closer look at the term, then, of course, once we know about the limitations of our responsibility, we also know about the range of our responsibility. So it's not a negation of responsibility, it's just to stress out of what we are responsible, what can we be held responsible for. Because, and this is one first statement, I don't think that companies are responsible for all the problems in the world. Maybe bigger companies, global players with hundreds of thousands of employees around the world, they have a very, very big and strong responsibility for many problems. But what about the small and medium-sized companies, which are also in the field of business responsibility, of social responsibility? Are they responsible for the climate change? Are they responsible for the hunger in the world? And I would say maybe, principally, I would say yes, but principally, theoretically. But what can they do, actually? And so we have to take a closer look at the term responsibility and about all the challenges that these companies face. So this is what I want to talk about. I have three parts in my presentation, and the first part is about basics, about terms, about the terminology, and about the context, or about the question, what relations do we have between business, companies, society, and ethics? So still the question, it's always the question, what is the range, what is the score of our responsibility? In the second field, I would like to bring two examples. I don't want to call them case studies, even if I could put it like that. It's two examples. The first one, checking ethics in regard to the choice of location, is something about medium-sized companies. And if I talk about the location, I don't mean a geographic location. It's more like a systematic location. Where is ethics systematically located within a special company, within a certain company? And this is also a hint of another statement of my talk. I will talk about the individual responsibility, and we will hear during the day lots about standards and initiatives of ethics and responsibility. I would bring it to the point as a development of these, starting with the standards, implement ethics in the management systems, get a brighter idea of what ethics and responsibility means, and then we come to a point when we talk about the individual responsibility, because we cannot cover all just by one standard or just by one concept of ethics. So it's a bit about, we heard something about the character. We have to make clear judgments about our behavior, about our actions, and it goes a bit in this direction. And then the second part of chapter 2 is about a global player, and I would like to talk about the areas of transformation. So what is changing? What happens to society and what happens to the economy, to the business, because which stresses this term of responsibility so much. Something must going on. I think all the discussion about ethics and responsibility did not just fall from heaven somewhere and now we discuss it. There must be a reason. But what is the reason? What are the dynamics behind it? And if we think about the dynamics of a development, then of course we can better think, at least it's my idea, that we can much better think about ethics as an integrated strategy of the company. It's not just an added on a value that is socially added on, or it's not two worlds that exist, the world of economics, the world of business on the one hand side, on the other side, the world of the society. It's one thing, it's integrated, but how can we deal with that? I try to elaborate a bit more on that point. And then, I think it's only one slide, number 3, chapter 3, I try to close the circle. So if I talk about business ethics, corporate responsibility, corporate social responsibility, however we want to call it, then I think of it as a circle. It's a big ball, and we can start at any place that we want to, and we come to the core in the end. So it doesn't matter where we start, but it's important to close the circle at the end, and this is what I try to do by the final slide about the perspectives. If I try to explain you about the basic terminology, about terms, definition, and so, please feel free if you have a question or something, for I'm not able, maybe because of the translation of my English, to bring it precisely. Please call, ask back, so I can put it more precisely, that we know what we are talking about. Okay, let us start with the first point. Ethics and morals. There are two words that in practice are often used in the same way or simultaneous. It's ethics and morals, but if you take a closer look at it, there's a difference between ethics and moral. Morality is something like a value system that a community has, a state has, a company has. So we, at least we here in this room, start to build out our own moral. Moral says or gives us the allowance what we are allowed to do, what we are not allowed to do. This is a good thing to do, this is the right thing to do, this is a bad thing to do, this is the wrong thing to do. And this is part of the moral. And sometimes we do not even reflect if there's a statement or a sentence like, you should do this and that, you should not lie. Why shouldn't I lie? Why is it a good sentence? Why shouldn't I lie? If you go to this question and if you start asking why is it like that? Why should I do this? Why should I do that? And then you come into the sphere of ethics. It's the reflection of the moral values that you have in a society, in a community, no matter how big the community is. So even the mafia, as a criminal organization, has its moral. They have values. They have loyalty, they have trust, but within the organization, it doesn't count outside. But this is very important to know when we talk about the moral, that it's not just there for everybody, for everyone. It's really closely related to the community or to the society that you're living in. And especially, I'm teaching in Berlin and my classes are colorful. You can really say it's very, very colorful. I have students from all over the world with different religious backgrounds, with different cultural backgrounds, and they do not always share the same values because their moral are from different perspectives. But then we start to talk about ethics, and we start to talk, why is it like this? Why should it be like that? And this is the difference. This one thing that happens, it's what I call the moralization of the markets. What does it mean? As an experience from my consultancy, I work together with quite a big company. It's almost 10,000 employees all over the world, but they had a problem to get new employees. The employees got older and older and older. Some left the company, and now they had to recruit new employees, good and well-qualified employees, but they couldn't get them. Why couldn't they get them? Because they were situated right next to a big, big global player, a chemical plant with 300 and more thousand employees around the world, with big career path, with chances for new starters, for the students that come from university to have big career, travel all over the world, have challenging work experience, and so on. So this smaller, even it wasn't a small company, but this smaller company couldn't compete with a big player. What did they do? They said, from the purpose of the business, they asked themselves, what can we do if we don't get the young? okay, qualify the older employees. Take a closer look to the generation 50 plus, 50 years and older, what in their sphere was the older employees. And they tried to train them, to educate them, give them new perspectives, to have a career, a second career in the company. And what happens? Please be sure, the reason for that was a business reason. They needed employees. But what happened outside, because it was also a cooperation with the Ministry of Labor, it was that the newspapers, the media, took that case and said, wow, this company does something for society. They give a new value to the older employees. They don't throw them out and only take the younger people as the strong and good people. No, they also take the older ones. And what happened there was exactly that, the moralization of the market. They did something for business reasons, for pure business reasons, but on the outside, in the society, it was evaluated and illuminated from just a different perspective. And then they were into business ethics. And this was the reason why they started the concept of diversity management. They started with the age diversity, and then they came to gender diversity, then they came to the cultural diversity, and so on. So this was kind of evolution, and now they're in the sphere of corporate social responsibility. And nobody asked them, do you want to do that or not? They just drifted into it. So the question, does it make the markets better or not? That's hard to tell. Maybe we can answer that question a bit later when we think about the transformation of the society, about the fields of transformation and what happens. And just to look to this point, I think what happens is there's a change going on. The way we are thinking will change. The way we are acting will change. And this is led by ideas, by values, and these values are changing. So if we talk about business ethics, it's the concrete phenomenon of something that starts in our minds. Otherwise, why should it be there? It comes from somewhere, but it starts in our minds. And this brings me to this point here, legality and legitimacy. So legitimacy and legality are not the same. Legality is if something complies to the law. If an action is not legal, you can sue the company. You can say, this is not right. You can go to court and they're sued and they have to pay fees and really lots of money as a fee. But in terms of the legitimacy, it's something different. It's about the society. It's not only the majority. Some concepts of legitimacy say it's the majority. What most of the people think it is right, that's legitimate. In a way it is, yes, but also there's a normative component in it, which means that you have to think about it, that you have to reflect about it, and that brings me back to the ethics. So legitimacy somehow is connected to ethics, because there's this one little question that we shouldn't forget about, is why? Why is it like that? So if we start with the question, why? Then we're in the sphere of ethics. Why can't we just do business as usual? We're used to it. We know how to manage a company in the old style. It worked for many, many years, but why should we change it? Because the values have changed. So this brings me to that point here. What about the business in society? What about the expectations of the stakeholders, for example? And what about the interdependencies? Usually, I'm sure you know about this model. It's the stakeholder model. They usually draw it as a satellite system. So in the middle, as the planet, it's the company. And then you have the employees, the customers. Maybe you have an NGO, which is a non-governmental organization. Then you have the state, and so on. So these are the stakeholders as satellites around the planet. And they have stakes on the company. They are somehow affected by the actions of the company. And therefore, they address the company with their demands. But again, and now I talk about the mutual interdependencies. What about the responsibility, if we think about responsibility, what about the responsibility of the stakeholders? If I follow up in this logic, Then there's another company, let's call it company 2. And the same NGO is also a stakeholder of that company. And of course, it has employees, probably different employees, but maybe the state, it's the same. So what I want to show is that if there's another company, we get into a network. And then we can ask, who is the stakeholder of who? Is the company a stakeholder of the stakeholder of the NGO, or is the NGO the stakeholder of the company? Or is it something mutual? Is there a strong interplay? And if we follow this line, then we get into something like this here. We get into a big network. And I think this is what the discussion and all the development will follow. We think about the networks, and society is a big network of different actors. And of course, and this brings me back to the first statement about the talk of the limits, the limitation of the responsibility of business, of a company. What about the responsibility and the range of responsibility of a stakeholder? And if we bring it into this interplay, in the mutual dependencies, interdependencies, then we have to think about responsibility in a balanced way. And if I talk about balance, it's not a balance, like an accounting balance. It's a process of balancing interests, demands, needs, ideas, and the base of it, the balance of the values. So, if we talk about values, values is something, or a value is something that gives you an orientation. If you think a bit closer about the term orientation and what does orientation mean, then I usually draw a little picture which helps me. So this is me here. I have no idea what I'm talking about, as always. And here's the sun. And where's the sun rising? In the east, in the orient. So I look at the sun in order to find my way. I look at the orient and bring an Asian on it, and then I'm at the orientation. And this is what the values are about. So the sun is just a symbol that gives me the idea of the values, of where I want to go. But still, I'm sure, as long as I live here on Earth, I can walk in the line, in the direction of the sun. But I cannot touch the sun. I will never reach it. But it helps me. It helps me. It gives me orientation at my daily work. Let's put it like this. So here, in the dirty world, this pure value of orientation helps me. Even if I know I won't be pure, I will be dirty. I've heard, you've already talked about these things. In the world, in our everyday business, it's not the pure theory, it's not the pure value, but we can get this orientation. But therefore, we need to have this orientation, and we need to have the values. We have to think and we have to reflect about our values within the company. Otherwise, we don't have this orientation, or we just do business as usual. So this is a new thing that is added on to the common management systems, or to the common way that we think of management. It's the integration of the orientation of the values into our management, into our strategic approaches, in the best of the worlds, into our management systems. Again, let me come back to the term responsibility. If we talk about responsibility, if you use the term, maybe later in the panel discussion, whatever, if we use the term responsibility, be aware of the structure. There are three little words that we have to ask. Who is responsible for what and to whom? That's what I've written here in the first part. Who is responsible for what to whom? The CEO, the manager, is responsible for a high shareholder value to his shareholders. That's one structure. And it's logic. It has an inner logic. That's right. The sentence is right. It's correct. But also you can say the CEO, the managers are responsible for more employees in the region to the community. It's also right. But what makes it right and what makes it wrong? Why can two people discuss about the same thing even though everybody is right? It's the values. What concept, what argumentation lies behind that? And this is very important. So whenever we talk about responsibility, whenever you talk about the responsibility of your company, first thing you should do, answer these questions. And we have an answer to these questions. Who am I responsible to? Okay, the subject, I am responsible. To who? To whom? For what? And you have that, and once you have this little structure and answers to these little few questions, then you can get a step deeper and ask what values are behind that. If we talk about this example with the shareholder value, of course it's the shareholder value concept that we've been educated for so many years. If we talk about this other example with the employees, maybe it's something like a stakeholder approach. Maybe it's something like the bigger idea of a corporate, social, or societal responsibility. And that brings me back to the values, and I really have to be clear about these things. Again, what do companies owe the society? If you still think about this network picture that I tried to draw, who owes what to whom? It's the same question. What do I owe my stakeholder? Who is a relevant stakeholder? Do I have to accept any group that comes, addresses, demands towards my company? Do I have to consider them as a stakeholder? Are they right? Or do I have to question that? Can I just ask them, and what is your responsible? And why do you think that I'm responsible for your demand? It's not, please, it's not that I say we're not responsible, not at all. The base is, and the bottom line, business is responsible, but we really have to be aware about what the responsible and how far the responsibility goes. This is very, very important in this question. And this brings us to this new way of thinking what a society, what a stakeholder network, what stakeholder management would be. Who is responsible? Again, this little picture. There's one person, there's another person, and there's a question. Why? Person A asks person B, why do you do this? And he addresses this other person, and this person responds. Person A asks, person B responds. This is the inner structure of responsibility. So whenever somebody asks you, or tells you, you are responsible, then ask yourself, who is asking this question? Why should I be responsible? How does it fit to the inner structure of my values? What are the values of this other person, of this other party or group that holds me responsibility, that it counts on me? Why is it like that? And then we can go into a discussion, and then it's a bilateral process, or if we make it bigger, we come to a multilateral dialogue, a multi-stakeholder dialogue, which is not only a company to multiply stakeholders, but also the stakeholders to multiply companies. Let me come to this point. What is success? And this also is something that depends on our values. The very easy answer is making as much money as possible, or the biggest luck of the biggest number, whatever this is in the end. What is success? Something that you can measure. And we all know these little sentences that we were taught in the management classes: if you cannot measure it, you cannot lead it. I would doubt that. Of course, you can lead companies, and think most of the leadership is not about measurement. Leadership, management starts where the figures end. Otherwise, you can put a computer program to your company and say, okay, let the computer run our company, I don't have to manage anymore. Management starts where the numbers and the programs end, where the future is undetermined, where we have to think, where we have to estimate, where we have to bring in our experience, our reflections, our thoughts, and again, our values. And then we have to bring something together, what we call a strategy, which is not coming out of the figures of the controlling department in the company. Not at all. It's just the other way. But sometimes companies and even scholars, academics pretend that it's the way first are the figures and then are the strategy. I guess it's the other way. And therefore we have to discuss what is success. Is it only the biggest money that we can make in a certain period or not? What if we want to do an investment? If we invest into the future, now we have to spend money to be successful in 10 years, that we are viable in the future. We have to spend money today, which on the balance sheet lowers our earnings, lowers our success in this close definition. But what if we talk about the viability of a company? Can it survive? If we talk about the survival of the company, it's something different than just talk about numbers. It's more, again, it's a way something shifts in our minds or in the minds. And if I talk to students, if I talk to managers, if I'm in companies, the words are changing. We talk about the survival of a company. We want to be a good player. Something happens, and that happens in the mind, and then we start to bring it into the concrete management system. So when we start talking about the standards, SA 8000, ISO 26000, or some other initiatives, if we talk about the Global Compact and so on, then now we think about the concrete methods, the tools we can use to set these standards, or standard could be considered as a tool. But before we start with that, before we come together to this room, into this conference, and start to think about these the adaptation of the standards, about business ethics, individual corporate responsibility concepts, there must have been something in advance, and this happened in our mind. So again, the question, what is success? Is it the viability? Is it the possibility to survive? Or is it just the numbers? And please get yourself a good answer to that question. It's a very simple question, but it's hard to answer if you're honest. And this is the normative level. It's not only the strategic level of leadership. It's the normative level. There are norms, there are values. And if we are on that step, and if you followed me to this point, then you may agree that values management or corporate responsibility, a good founded and grounded concept of corporate responsibility, is a hard fact in the company. It's not a soft fact. But when I was studying back in the 19th, it was, there were the hard facts, which were the figures in the company, and there were the soft facts, these HR things, marketing things, all that stuff, a bit strategic, organizational stuff. It's something like the soft facts. But if we take a closer look, and if we go outside and look what happens there, the changes within society, then be sure that the hard facts are the values and not the figures. The figures is something that is the outcome that comes behind it. And it's very, very hard to discuss about values, because depending on the context, on the personal, individual, morality of a person, there can be strong argumentations, and struggles about just these questions. And it's not only about the money, it's not only about the numbers. And this normative level is our principal orientation. We need to have a principal orientation. And be sure, all of you, as your managers in companies, owners of companies, directors in the companies, be sure that you have a value system there. But the question is how good and how transparent for yourself, not for the outside. How transparent is it reflected? Do you really know about the values that you follow or not? But it's no doubt there are values. But then you have to start to think about them, to maybe write them down, give explanations, discuss them. And then you have to ask the question, are these really the values that I want to follow? And do these values still fit to the society that is changing? And the society is the environment where my business is embedded. And this brings me again to the three questions, let's call me core questions. It's always about the core. One thing is the range of the responsibility. If we start with our core business, what are the products? What are our core products? What do we produce? What is our core service? We have to answer this question. It's a common business question. It's not a difficult question in a way, but still, this is the reference point. And if we know about our core business, then we can start the discussion of the range of our responsibility. I will come later to a check. I'll show you a check that some companies, especially the medium-sized companies, went through. And I did all the personal talk. There was a big questionnaire. I did some personal talk with the CEOs of these companies. And sometimes they were really proud when I asked them, what do you do for energy reasons, or what do you do as a societal benefit? And then they tell me, we use recycled paper. I said, well, it's a good thing. Or we use fair trade coffee. It's also something, it's also a good thing. But if we bring it to the core business, if we are in this field of a logistic company, we have to look at our trucks. We have to look at the fuel that we need and that we use. We have to think about the time our employees, our drivers are behind the wheel. Do they have the chance to see their families? Is everything safe? Is it not? So it's connected to the core business. And if we have a good concept, a really good concept, morally good and functional good concept behind this core business in terms of corporate responsibility, and then we can start thinking about fair trade coffee. But some people start just the other way around, and then we have these do-gooder people who do not consider ethics and values as a hard fact, but just as a soft fact, as an add-on, and it gives you a good feeling in your stomach. It feels warm, it feels good. I've done something for the company, for this pure coffee farmers in Ecuador or wherever. But that's not the reason of business ethics, at least not if we talk about a modern business ethics. So please be aware of your core business. And from there, we can check what effects your business has, how your business affects and influences society. And at that point, you have to start with the tools, with the instruments, with the concept of your responsibility. So, another core business. What is the core effect? The core effect of what you do. If I bring it back to the logistic company, for example, or if we're in trade, trading sales company with clothes, and then we have to think about the supply chain, is there child labor and all these things. Then we have to really think about what is the effect. How does my business affect society? How does my business affect the environment? And if I have an answer, a clear answer to this question, then I can start with instruments. Then I can start to do something against it. So if we talk about different spheres, in the core, outer sphere, and even wider spheres, like an onion. You know, you can peel it, but in the core, this is your responsibility. And then we talk about the core responsibility. So CR, in my terminology, drifts from corporate responsibility into core responsibility. And if we have this core responsibility, then we can think about the range of the responsibility. How far does this responsibility go? Which demand of a stakeholder is acceptable and which not? And it's not just the question to, do I accept this demand of a stakeholder or do I not accept it for my personal way of thinking? It's not an emotional thing. I need good reasons for that. Good reasons. And good is something that's connected to ethics, connected to the values. I need a strong argumentation, and then I can say, okay, my company is responsible for this, but it's not for the fair trade, it's not for the climate change, but for the supply chain, if I have a very big supply chain, for example. This is part 2 of my talk. What are we dealing with here? We've talked about the terminology, about the basics, just to get a foundation in the words, in the terms of what we are talking about. And this is a check. It's 2 slides. These 2 slides are the chapters, in a way, of the question that companies have to answer. And it's addressed basically to medium-sized companies, also to some small companies, but not to the global players. They play, in a way, in a different league and have to answer different questions. But these are the, let's call them the clusters that the companies have to ask if they want to do an ethics check. And it's behind an initiative. Now this is a for-profit initiative, but you find many foundations who have these checks, other from consultancies, they have these checks or whatever you want to see. So on many places, these checks or these initiatives are popping up. And one reason behind this, to be honest, for the companies is to get a stamp or something. They want to have a stamp. We did it. We belong to the good people. We belong to the good companies. And they have a license then. They can put it on the wall and say, okay, we do good ethics in business. We have a check. We are number on the top 10 of all the participants, and we are really, really good in business ethics. One thing here is that it also already drifted into a more or less individual evaluation. It's not that we just look, what do you have? Of course we check. It's like a catalog. It's a questionnaire of 28 pages. And these are just the cluster, the aggregated question or topics. But still, we have the chance to balance it, because there is one thing that people have to just mark this question, answer these questions like on a catalog, and behind that we go into a personal talk. And then we really can see, is it more like a marketing strategy? Do they know the wording? Which is also something that happens in the fear of business ethics, that companies get to know the words. They know which words to use in the communication department in order to get a good profile and reputation outside. Or do they really have something behind it? And sometimes it happens, or quite often it happens, that companies that in the first step have a low evaluation are finally the better companies in these terms, because they are more reflected. It's not just a talk, it's not just a strategic wording. They think, oh, do we have a good talent service? Do we care about the security at our working places? Do we know about the supply chain? And if they are not sure, they say no. But others who just think they are the good guys by definition, they say yes, even though they don't have something. So we really have to take a closer look to it. So what is it? I think there's one chart before. What are the main things? First thing is that we talk about the values. And what you find here is, in a way, business as usual. Do you have something like a mission statement or a vision? Do you have a code of conduct? Do you have a concept of responsible leadership? And here is a tricky question, is this responsibility? What is responsibility? I think you remember, it's not, is it about the rising of the shareholder value, or is it about a societal question? What is responsibility about in these terms? So we already ask in this direction. And is it organizational anchored? Is there within the structure a steady element that brings leadership or brings values into the leadership system? Is there a system at all? Even if we talk, please think that we talk about medium-sized companies, sometimes 20 employees, sometimes they have 200 or 400 employees, but not the real big players. And sometimes they don't even have something. What about the talent services, the modern world of human resource management? Is it values-based? How do you train your people? Is there participation? Is there a partnership within your company? What about the wages? Are they paid in a fair way? Do you have a diversity concept? As I said, 50 ages, 50 plus, gender diversity. What about people with a different sexual orientation? Are they discriminated or not? So these are the questions that are behind it. And what about health and safety? And we do not check, or this test, it's not only us, it's a wider network that works with these things. It's not about the legal things. So if they tell us, well, it's by law, we just fulfill the law, then it doesn't count, because we expect that. It's nothing that you can be proud of. I keep the law. What is it? Not in the sphere of corporate social responsibility. And now another thing. What about the involvement of society and the environment? And what do you do to engage your company in this context? Sometimes companies send their managers to kindergarten or to school. have a social day and ask them, okay, now go into the school and paint the walls, you do something good for society. And then again, if you bring it back to the core business, that's not the point what CR and social responsibility is about. Of course not. Because usually managers are not the good painters. They can sometimes paint walls, but it's not their, let's say, core skill. They're not trained to do that. So it's better if a manager, or let's say, put it concrete as a banker, person who works at a bank, goes into, or talk to people who cannot afford a good advice in dealing with their debts, with their financial structures and so. And then they bring their competences right in to a spot where they really can be of a good use. And then we come somehow to the biggest number, of the biggest luck. That's a bit this direction. So please, if you or if your company will be engaged in society, it's not just spend money, it's not just go out there and plant a little tree or something. It really should be connected to your business and to your core competencies, to what you can do best, and then you have the best effort, or the best result for society as well as for you. And another thing is, that's quite tricky, I don't know how the discussion here is, I've experienced this quite often. If I ask people, is your social engagement somehow connected to your business, you really see, even if they don't do it, but you really feel that people jump 1 meter behind and say, no, 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 of course not. For they still have these pictures, if it's connected to my business, it's not good. Because moral things, responsible things for community, they have to hurt me somehow. And I would ask the question, why should it be like that? If you bring your core competence, if the things you can do best to the benefit of society, then you really help society as its best. Yeah? So there's a strong connection, again, between the core business, the core competencies, and the things that you can do for society. Other questions, other fields are environmental protection, climate protection, energy efficiency. And again, always be sure about the effect your company in terms of energy, in terms of environmental problems has to the community. This is the core thing that you have to consider. So if our small consulting agency with a handful of people, it's not about our traveling, it's not about our fair trade coffee or whatever. But if it's a big plant, a big factory that really pollutes the environment, then they have to deal with this environmental protection. They have to deal much stronger with it because their effect in society is much, much bigger, which does not pull me out of responsibility. I'm still responsible, but it's a more principal responsibility. I have to be aware of what I'm doing, but I cannot be compared with a small agency, with my small agency, with a big company that really pollutes in their process of building their products. Another thing, supply chains. Many people, or many companies, especially the small companies, they do not have a supply chain. I mean, they buy the coffee and they buy paper. They buy printers and computers and that stuff. But it's not that they have a big value chain that is lying before them. But it's something for, if you deal with clothes, trading companies, if you really deal with clothes, then there is something that you can really think of. Is there child labor? Is other way these clothes, these 4 products are produced? Are they produced in a good way or not? So these are different questions different companies have to answer, and therefore the responsibility, the corporate responsibility of a company, of the companies are different. It's not the same thing for every company. And then we come to the final thing. What about the stewardship, environmental compatibility to your products, social aspects, or do you really involve customers in developing your products, which is quite like an open source concept that's very at the front and into the relation or close to the relation to your customers. So do you have an idea of that, or is it something we still this way of thinking? We produce our goods, we produce the things, the products that we can do best, and the customers should buy it. Or is there an interaction? And if we think about this interaction between you, your company, and the customer, then we think again about the limits of the company, the borders. Is it an open company? Where does the company end? No, not where does the responsibility end, but where does the company end? Or is the customer in a concept already inside your company? And if it is like that, then you still have a different responsibility or a different aspect, a different notion of responsibility. So how much time do I have? 10 minutes? 10 minutes, okay? No, this way. Okay, this is the result of the check, just to see how things can happen. And this here, it's the control of your sink, where the water comes out of the sink. And this is just the benchmark result from a company that deal with these things, situated in southwest Germany. And everything they do, and this is why I found it quite interesting, it's not about their values and leaderships and so on. It's about the involvement, the connection to the product, because everything they do in terms of social engagement, environmental engagement, is related to water. So if the local football club comes and asks them for new shirts or something, they say, no, okay, maybe if you have some money left, but it's not our core responsibility, or it's not that we want to sponsor you. We do things around water. So they develop concepts to save water, to produce clear water, maybe in dry areas, no, not in Europe these days, but maybe in Africa, and they're internationally producing. And so every effort they do, everything they do is about water. And why is it about water? It's their core product, it's their core business, and it's their core competence. That's what they can do best. So let them do things around water, and don't let them build cars. They cannot do it. And don't let them paint walls in schools. They wouldn't be able to do that. So just as an idea. Okay, what are we doing if we do this check, if we've done this check? What have we done? One thing is that we illuminated the company from different perspectives. And this is what happens here. It's a shift. It says that what happens if we talk about social responsibility? It's something that starts in our minds, in the way we are thinking, in a shift of our values, but we're still working in our companies with the old tools, with our old management system, usually. And what we do here with a check like this, or if we talk about ISO 26000, if we talk about the SA 8000 and other things, we bring a new perspective, a new spotlight on our company to departments or to fields in our company that nobody ever has thought of under this perspective. And though, even if you don't want to deal with corporate responsibility, if you say, okay, I don't want to do nothing with these things, then you get to know your company much better than it was before, than you knew it before. Just because you have illuminated your whole company in a holistic way from different points. And this is a big benefit just to do something like that. And then you can have a self-evaluation and define your standing. What is my profile? Do I know about my values? This is what I mean here. Where am I actually, and where am I in relation to others? This does not mean that you do something later. It doesn't mean that, okay, do this step and then, of course, and now we implement a business ethics system or whatever. Maybe you do nothing. Maybe you find out, oh, we do quite a lot. We just have to reinterpret it. And that could be, because sometimes it's just a conceptual reformulation of the things that are there. Then you put some things away that doesn't fit anymore, put some new things on it, and then your company, or the way you view your company has changed. And now you view the company under an ethical, responsible perspective. And of course, then when you have this perspective, your walk has to follow the talk, of course. But maybe you already walk the talk, but you don't know it. And this is why it's so important to put this spotlight on the company. And then, one of the last points here is do good and talk about it. This is one of the oldest arguments about this ethical discussion. Do something good and talk about it. If you don't talk about it, nobody knows, it's no benefit for you. This is the very pure logic in these terms. And of course, you should talk about it but there should be something behind it, or a fundament that you stand on. And this is very important. It's not just the talk, even if you now start with the ISO or the SA or Global Compact, whatever. It's not just the logo. It's not just to put a logo being ethical somewhere. Because, as I showed you with this example of this company that started with this concept for older employees, the media will watch you. And the media is a strong player. So if we talk about society, it's not only about the neighbors. Maybe you have a struggle with the neighbors and it really can bother you, but maybe it doesn't affect you in your daily business because the customers that are situated somewhere else doesn't know about the struggle with your neighborhood. But if the media gets an interest of you and they draw you to the dirty water of media reports, then you are in charge. So if you talk about it, and you should talk, I really would recommend talk about, bring it in your communication, but be sure that there is something behind the talk, that you always know about your talk. And this again brings me to this point of, with which I started, to the limits and limitation of your responsibility. Don't promise more than you can hold by the end, and please be aware your range and the limits of your responsibility. Okay, these are my two last slides. Then you're released. But this is a pretty complex thing here. And now it's the case or the example of a global player. It's a very big company, worldwide, globally, and with a level number 1 and number 2 in this company, which means a board of directors, we developed this concept, this slide, in order to ask about the future of the responsibility. Again, to the question, what is it that is changing? What are we dealing with here? And I'm talking about transformation. Society, business, economics, our values are in the transformation process. Again, back to this question, where does all this discussion about CR comes from? It didn't just fall from heaven. Somehow it must be there. Something has changed. So the answer is, if you follow the thought that business is embedded in society, and it's not two worlds, here is business and there's society, which was the old school in a way. If we follow the thought that business is embedded in society, then societal changes have a strong influence on business. And again, since business is embedded in society, changes within the company have an influence on society, which is a systemic connection, these mutual interdependencies that I was talking about. And what we have put here is, on the left side, what are the fields? Every column is a field of transformation. Of course, well, I'm sure you could add some different fields, but what is changing? So we talk about responsibility and sustainability, which is the first column here. Of course, companies are held responsible. They should make responsible, sustainable business. That's set. No discussion about that. But then, what is leadership and what is power? Sometimes I have the idea, if I talk with managers, that, okay, leadership is something that's by a charismatic character, and this is the one and only guy, or it's a man or woman, no matter, who has this strong character, charisma, and is leading the company by his or her thoughts and visions. Is this leadership? And what about power? Is it allowed? Is it still allowed to talk about power in companies, or isn't it modern enough? Is it some patriarchal old thing to talk about power where somebody says what the others have to do? And if you look into the company, even if they talk in a different way, there's a lot of power struggles, power games, and all these things. There's quite a lot of it. And we shouldn't close our eyes, but still, what is power? What do we consider as power? And if we think about this network that I've drawn before on one of my first slides, this networks between companies, between stakeholders. So let's say the the combination of business and society, this network altogether is a network. What does power mean there? What does leadership mean there? That brings me to a question, to open question, or to a statement that I say it's almost impossible to lead a company. We can steer it, but what is leadership in these terms? How can we lead a company through this windy network with all our stakeholders? Or do the stakeholders from outside steer and lead much more than we really would accept? So there's a strong interdependence between these actors and players, and we really have to think about leadership. Markets and morals, okay, I've talked about that. But what is identity? If you think about a diverse company, and the bigger a company gets, the more diverse it gets. If you're playing all over the world, you have people from all over the world. You have people with different social backgrounds, people with different religion background, all these diversity aspects. I'm sure you know the diversity aspects, which is age, gender, ethnical background, sexual orientation, religious orientation, and handicapped, the degree of handicap. And if you really think about a big company, you have all of these people there. And what then, if we have a diverse company, which is a mirror of society, what is our identity? And then we have to bring this back to the question of values. How do we have values that cover all the diversity of the society and of the company that we are managing in? And this is quite a big challenge. Another thing, we talked about that, participation of our employees. Do we still have lifelong contracts, or do we have a concept of freelancers? What is cooperation? Sometimes we have to cooperate with our competitors. It's not very easy to do this. And the more open, the more worldwide and global and dynamic our business gets, the more this co-opetition process gets. Co-opetition is a mix between cooperation and competition. What about the work-life balance? There are many, especially in this diversity discussion also, a question about what is the work-life balance? Do we have family-friendly concepts? And do we have all over the world the same concepts? If I come back to this global player, they also have plants in China. And I'm sure you know the argument of labor in China, working 14, 16, 18 hours a day. But what happened? They started with an initiative to reduce the daily working hours from, let's say, 17 or 18, 16 hours to only 12 hours or 10 hours, which in our Western perspective is something good. But what happens there? Most of the Chinese workers didn't go home to their family as we expected them. They got a second job in order to get up to their used 16 hours, and then they get more income. So this is a collision of the values, but we have to deal with it. So what is work and life? Do we all share the same concept? Freedom, justice, now it gets a bit philosophical. And I want to jump into this discussion now. Growth, wealth, again, what is success? The discussion or the point that I had before. What is success? What is wealth? What is growth? Do we have to grow, or can we just be stable, dynamically stable in a certain state and still feel or think that we are successful? Globalization, of course, and digitalization, mobile work with the internet, separate our working process, our process of service all over the world, which is digitalized, people working in India, people working here in Poland, in Germany. We all work together, and how does this lead into new forms of collaboration and of working together? And still, what is the company then? And this is what I mean here. We talk about a new future. So we think about a new society, which comes from here. It's this arrow here. It's all the fields of transformation that we have. And still, if we go back and if we still believe into this idea that companies are embedded in society and therefore have to face societal issues, then society gives an impact on the companies, which is covered by these fields of transformation. But still, on the other side, these aspects here are things that happen in the company How do companies restructure their organization? How do they manage? How do they deal with their, let's say, responsibility? How do they, or who do they consider as stakeholders? And now we are in a process of intermediation. Maybe it's moderated or not, but it's a very discursive process. It's a play of power in a way. Is the company the powerful player? Are the stakeholders the powerful player? What role does the state, the government play? And what role does media play? And then we are in this process, what we call a mutual transformation, a mutual redefinition of what is going on here. And then this leads us, and now this is when we talk about the trends in corporate responsibility or what is going on, which way do we take? Then we talk about a new future, societal impacts that had to be covered by the management systems, but also company with their power impact society, as they always did, of course. But we have to bring it into a new arrangement in our minds, and then we talk about a new future. So where do we want to go as the final slide and the final question? Again, even if we think about this concept slide that a complex slide and concept that I've shown before, we still have to come back to our own company, to our own values. We have to think about the reference point. What is our reference point? From where do we start our game, our definition, our concept? What is the image that I have myself as a company, but also how can I impact and influence the transformation that is going on? What is my personal definition, not personal, individual, company, individual definition of success? Again, is it money? Is it the social impact? Is it only the reaction, or is it proactive towards everything that happens around me? What role do I play in this big, big network? What have I done? Is this question here. Maybe all of you, I'm sure all of you with your companies, with your organization, have quite a lot of things already done in terms of ethics, in terms of corporate responsibility. But please try to look at them out of a new perspective and bring them into a redefinition. Just bring them into a reformulation. And then you see how you're standing in this sphere, in this process of transformation is. And then you can ask the question, okay, do I implement this standard and do I implement that standard? So I'm not against standard. Standards are very, very helpful, but they need to have sense, need to make sense in connection and in relation to your core values. And again, what is your core responsibility? If you know what you're standing for, if you know what definition of success you have, if you know what your role in society is, then I'm sure you get a good idea about your responsibility. You get a good idea about the range of your responsibility, and more of that, you get a good idea about the limitations of your responsibility. Thank you very much.